welcome everyone tonight to our latest event in the Angler Event Series program that we have going on here throughout 2021 in the city of Worcester. Tonight's event is called Tangled in the Weeds. It's an event about the effect of invasive aquatic species on our fish populations and fish health. We have some special guests here tonight, Tom Flannery from DCR and Peter Collins from the Lake Quinsigamond Commission. They're going to be sharing with us tonight. This event is co-hosted by the City of Worcester, the Lake Quinsigamond Watershed Association, and the Lake Quinsigamond Commission. So we're really excited to have you all here. Just some quick background on the Angler Event Series. This is a brand new series that we launched in 2021. It's a series of 13 free events that involve all things fishing and water quality and fish health. They're a combination of virtually and socially distant in-person events for anglers of all skill levels and just people who are interested in water quality and ecological issues. So this was a collaboration between these different watershed associations throughout Worcester, including Indian Lake Watershed Association, Tatanic Brook Watershed Association, and Lake Quinsigamond Watershed Association. If you enjoy this event, I would definitely encourage you to check out the other events that we have coming up throughout the remainder of the year on wooanglerseries.com. You could also check out recordings of the previous events there. So without further ado, I'm going to present to you Tom Flannery, who's going to be sharing with us his presentation, Healthy Lakes and Aquatic Nuisance Species. He is an aquatic ecologist with the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation, and he has been working with the City of Worcester Lakes and Ponds program for quite a while now, giving some of his weed watches presentations in which he shares his expertise on identifying invasive aquatic plants. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Tom.
Thank you. Let me open this up. All right. Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, I worked for DCR for a long time. Our Lakes and Ponds program in DCR, what we're really charged with, at least 90% of our job is managing lakes and ponds in the DCR state park system. So, lakes that we fully own and operate. That's where our budget is spent. That's where I spend my days working, chasing permits down to do plant control and, checking swim beaches for bacteria, harmful algae blooms, erosion, and that kind of thing. We have other properties like on Quinsigamond where there is a small state park on the lake. So, we'd be sort of in charge with handling that area, but not the entire lake as a whole, if that makes any sense. Like I said, our funding's 100% for DCR water bodies. A lot of lakes in the state are in the same boat. They're pooling funds through lake associations, dues, mandatory or voluntary, or chasing down town money through conservation or wherever else. But it's a tough battle. It's expensive to take care of these nuisance species, and there's not this huge funding source out there outside of the state park system. Tonight I'm going to talk mostly about, we leave it pretty open. I'm more than happy to answer any kind of questions, but we're going to, in general, be talking mostly about aquatic nuisance species here in Massachusetts, things that we already have here, things that we're concerned about, some of the impacts, and what we're doing about it here. So let me get a little terminology out of the way. Aquatic nuisance species, ANS, is what you're going to hear me using mostly. And you'll hear all kinds of other terms thrown around, and there's nothing wrong with any of them. You hear aquatic invasive species, you hear exotic species, that sort of thing. We have sort of adopted the National Aquatic Nuisance Species Task Force. It's a federal level. If you've ever driven around at boat ramps, you see these boat ramp signs with the universal language, like the white and red stop sign, the Stop Aquatic Hitchhikers campaign. That is the Federal Aquatic Nuisance Species Task Force. So by using that term, aquatic nuisance species, we stay in line and try to sort of create this universal language. So no matter where you go in the country, it's sort of seamless, the transition as far as terminology goes and signage and stuff. I want to point out here, aquatic nuisance species or invasives, whatever terms I throw around tonight, are always going to include non-native plants and animals. Those will always become a problem. But I want to make one point here. Native plants and animals can be considered a nuisance at some point in time. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Most of the time, these native species are from this region, from New England. You know, they belong here. We want them. We want a very rich species richness and diversity are the key terms. We want a very rich and diverse community of native plants. Very healthy for fish. The entire aquatic ecosystem sort of revolves around it. Now, there are different levels of native plants that we like to see in a lake. We never want to see swimming pools. There's no such thing as treating a whole lake for weeds, if you will. But your definition of what the nuisance could be can vary from one lake to another. For fisheries health, quite a few experts that I've heard talks from, as for a recreational lake, I'm talking a high recreational lake with, you know, a lot of water skiing and open water access type activity, something like 20% coverage of the entire lake, that being that bottom coverage or mixed in some floating leaf plants of native plants and as many different species as possible is ideal. But something like 20% plant coverage is a good balance between habitat for fish and recreation. Now, versus it's not the ideal number all around. Something more closer to 40% coverage is probably the best number for fisheries health. But you run into some issues with recreation there. So if you have a more natural sort of lake that's not really developed, not used a lot by the public, we might want to be somewhere closer to that like 40% range of native plant coverage. Beyond that, you start getting to the point where native plants can become an aquatic nuisance. A lot of times it's our own fault, human input, you know, all the nutrients that we contribute to a watershed, stormwater runoff, and things of that nature that are fueling these plant growth. So we're sort of making these native plants grow more than they would under a more natural condition. But some things to keep in mind, because non-native species we don't want anywhere. The big problem with the native, now even non-natives have some benefit to wildlife. I cannot sit here and say that they don't. Purple loosestrife, for example, that top picture. Beekeepers love this stuff. The bees love it. But what do you see here? Nothing but purple loosestrife. It's what we call a monoculture. It has completely wiped out any of the native plants that used to be in that meadow. So again, back to that species richness and diversity, the more different species we have, the more benefit there is to local wildlife and in an aquatic setting to fish. We don't want to see these monocultures, and that is the big problem with almost all of the non-natives. Picture at the bottom is parrot feather. That's a classic aquarium plant that gets released once in a while. Just a quick example of what I was just mentioning as far as the just clearing the air with the can native plants become a nuisance. Everyone knows white water lilies is a native plant, and in say Lake Quinsigamon over there in the cove somewhere or any lake, I think we'd all agree that there's a benefit there. It's great fish habitat, it's shade, it's shelter. But now, if Lake Quinsigamon, or in this picture here, Mausert's Pond, was 100% covered in water lilies, even though it's a native plant, I would think we would all agree that it has grown to nuisance densities in that case. So again, you have a native acting like an invasive, shading out all the other desirable species that we want underneath. So just because it's native doesn't mean it can't behave badly. And this is just a quick example. That's a whole lake that got taken over with a native plant. We did some hydro raking. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. I've got some photos later where we actually dig out the lily pad rhizomes with a York rake. We did not do chemical treatment at this particular lake, just to get some open access for canoe kayak. We have a bunch of campgrounds there. Swimming, obviously you can't do that in the picture on the left. So work in progress. We've been picking away on the right there. It's out in Clarksburg. Impacts to these aquatic nuisance species. You've probably been introduced to some of these concepts, but I'll just sort of remind folks, is the competition with the native plants that we want to have here. They outcompete them. Most of these plants grow these surface canopies at some point in time. They grow so fast, so they're shading out. All plants need to photosynthesize, just like plants in your yard. You block that sunlight to the native plants that grow nice and low, and it next thing you know, all you have is this monoculture of the invasive. And again, they make these dense mats that make the swimming, fishing impossible. So I'm sure there's some fishermen on here, and you know what it's like trying to fish in that stuff. Most of the native plants grow a lot lower. They don't make these big surface canopies. They stay nice and low. You barely ever know they're there. They're great habitat. You can boat through there. You can swim. You can fish around it. It's a good thing. So we're trying to lean towards just having native plants. These plants can decrease your property values as well, as you can imagine. If in front of your house looked like that picture on the bottom there, I think you might have a tough time selling it. But moving on. So the aquatic nuisances, how do they get here in the first place? Some of the microscopic organisms, I'll touch base on some later, something like zebra mussels, ship ballast water. There's some regulations in place these days, but it used to be fairly unregulated. You've got these ships coming from, a lot of times, these invasives come from like the Black and Caspian Sea region. These big cargo ships, they take on water from that area to balance the load. Then say they get over here, they're in the Great Lakes system or wherever, they spill out that water. Any of the critters that were in there are now in the new system. So accidental or intentional release from aquariums and water gardens. Classic picture here, a little girl with the fish tank. Mom or dad says it's time to get rid of these goldfish or this turtle. We're gonna go set it free to the wild. Well, as you're dumping in the pet, any of those possible non-native plants that you might have bought at the pet store, which it is regulated, is illegal, but I still see it to this day. Non-native plants marketed as, so a classic one is something like Hydrilla or South American waterweed, sold at not Petco, but other places like that, labeled as Elodia, which is a native lookalike, but when I see these, sometimes it is the non-native plant. So anything you bought there to decorate your fish tank with is now in the new lake, and this stuff spreads so rapidly. Some people just don't understand how easily they're spread, and they're not going to cause harm on purpose, but it becomes an issue here. Or mixed in with other plant shipments. You've probably bought stuff even for your landscaping at home, where in the potted plant that you have, there's something else growing in there. These seeds and things get moved around, and they can be mixed in with other plants. So you're trying to buy these native plants, whether it be for your landscape project or something else, and there could be some invasives in there that you did not intentionally purchase, but there they are. And then once they're here, so once they've been introduced to a region, how they spread around. Number one, hitchhiking on boats, trailers, other gear, like the picture on the top there, the bearded boat. Classic example, coming out of an infested lake boat ramp, what that looks like. Now, that's a mess for an angler to have to clean off their trailer. But one little 1-inch fragment of these invasives, they all spread by fragmentation. So a tiny little 1-inch piece will float around, grow what we call adventitious roots, and start a whole new colony. So overland transport by trailer boats, I've seen plenty of data to support it's probably 90+% of how these plants are spread around. So checking your gear before you go fishing from one place to another is key. And with the plants, you don't have to do anything fancy with different types of chemical solutions or hot water or anything. It's just a visual survey, because it's the actual plant material that will start an infestation in the next lake. It's all about physical removal. And sure, hosing off a boat after you've already removed things by hand is a great idea. You might be able to get some fragment that you missed, but checking is the real tricky spot. If you don't have rollers, you've got carpeted bunks, where if you have some plants that get squished between the boat hull and the bunk, it's a nice moist environment, that fragment will stay alive. And unknown to you, even though you tried doing the right thing and cleaning off your boat, the next time, it could even be a week later, you go to a different lake and you go launch that boat, and there you go. You just introduced one of these invasives that was hitchhiking on your trailer bunk. So also, bait buckets, wells, and cooling water. A lot of people, we do have this boat rent monitor program I can talk about a little later, but we do check the live wells on the boats, and you fishermen know what live wells are. So you're keeping live bait and an aeration system on board the boat. That's fine if you just got the water from the bait shop and that's what's in there. But but as you know, when you get to the lake, you hit the button on your dash, get some fresh water flowing through there. That is straight lake water, as I'm sure you know about your boat, and keep your bait alive, which is fine if you're just using it in one lake, and then before you leave, you're draining that water. But if you decided to go fish, the fishing was lousy in that first lake that morning, and you're heading off to another lake for the afternoon, you have Lake A's water in your bait well, and the second you drop in that second lake and hit the button, as you can imagine, you're spilling the other lake's water into there. More of a concern for microscopic organisms that spread around, like zebra mussels, spiny water flea, fishhook flea, we'll talk about a little later as well. So something to keep in mind. Fragments of water currents. This is actually another, other than overland transport, fragments in water currents is another significant pathway on how these invasives spread. So if you've got an infested lake upstream of your lake, these plants get broken up by boat propellers or just wind-driven events. If there is water flow, now there's nothing that you can really do about it, but these plant fragments are now floating downstream into your lake. And that's where the constant monitoring of your lake downstream or doing something about the lake upstream come into effect. And then occasionally by wildlife. Wildlife can definitely spread invasives around. It's certainly possible. Humans, nowhere near the amount that humans can do, but yeah, it's certainly possible. A goose could fly into one lake with water chestnut, for example, get some seeds somehow stuck in its feathers, fly off to another place, and that's something we can't control. But it's something that, a point that I'm going to speak about in a little bit on how important it is to be vigilant and constantly monitoring your lake for new things that pop up, because there are things that we can't control. Even if we have a boat ramp monitor, doing education outreach and inspecting trailers and equipment coming into the lake, they're not going to be able to catch that goose that flew in with something. So we still need to be on the lookout. So next I want to move into talking about the common established nuisance species we have here in Massachusetts, and I'll tell you a little bit about each one. I won't spend a ton of time on it. This is actually Barry Hillquist. He is the expert on aquatic plants here in the Northeast. He literally wrote the book on plant identification. So he's retired these days, but still super active. Great guy. All right, Eurasian milfoil and variable milfoil. These are the two most common invasives we have in the state, milfoils. The Eurasian milfoil we find mostly in Western Massachusetts. However, it is statewide, but more so in the West. Variable milfoil, on the other hand, is extremely rare for us to find in the western part of the state, but it's all over central and eastern and up into New Hampshire. It's probably the most managed species out there. So both of them are very similar. They both grow extremely dense, make surface canopy cover. They grow very rapidly. They spread by fragmentation. So, broken up anyway, boat prop, like I said, they spread all over the place and they spread quickly. They also can do something called auto fragmentation. So something that didn't even if something didn't break them up at some point in the year, they can actually sort of break themselves apart to help themselves spread. So it's one that you want to really find very early, any of these milfoils. Here's just an example. This is Eurasian milfoil. So I mentioned the eastern part of the state, we don't see as much Eurasian milfoil, but this is Lake Cochituate out in Natick, Mass. Actually in 3 towns, Natick, Wayland, and Framingham. That's Eurasian milfoil topped out to the surface. You can see how quickly that took the place over. We've got this under control these days, but that's out to about 17 feet of water. It's another point to keep in mind. These nuisance plants will only grow as deep as sunlight can penetrate the bottom, back to that basic principle of photosynthesis. if your water clarity, say you're down on Cape Cod somewhere and you're in these kettle hole ponds, you have water clarity. I mean, some of these places you could see 30 feet to the bottom or close to it. You could potentially have these invasives growing that deep. More of our lakes don't have that type of clarity, but you know, we regularly see, like here at Lake Cochituate, it's probably about 15 feet, give or take, on average. So yeah, these plants, this is 17-foot high milfoil here, and that takes a very short amount of time to grow to that level. It's very aggressive, but this lake is in the 70 or so feet deep in the middle. So basically, every square inch of this lake system, there's over 700 acres there, probably 150 of it, which is in the zone that can support these plants, is 100% infested. But now we are doing some active management. The place is in great shape. We barely find any. We've got a thriving native plant community. It's been a great program. It's been going since we've been on this for many years now. So it is achievable. Fanwort, and that's a classic aquarium plant. Very pretty plant. You will see those growing in aquariums, even at the places that sell the plastic stuff. That's one of the most common ones you will see, but very common in Massachusetts. That is one you really want to learn the idea of. You want to find, there's no other plant that I know of around here other than Hydrilla, which I'm going to go into a little more detail today, that spreads as rapidly as Fanwort. And it's super fragile. It spreads very easily. It breaks apart very easily. So even if you find it, some people thinking they're doing good, and well, I'll just hand pull this first patch I found. If you're not extremely careful, you probably just made the situation worse. It breaks apart very easily. And all of those escapees, those little pieces that float away, are all going to just spread like wildfire in the lake there. Curly leaf pondweed, Potamogeton crispus, looks like those lasagna noodles. This genus Potamogeton there's well over 100 species probably. All native except for this one. This one, I guess if you had to have an invasive in your lake, this is probably the one to have, because even if you didn't manage it, what it does, it comes up usually in May, makes an absolute mess, 100% coverage, and then it dies back on its own. So the rest of the season, it's almost like it was never there. It's very easy to treat for, but again, it's short-lived season to season, but it is very dense when it does take hold. Here's an example of the Fanwort. You can't see great in the picture on the left, so I did this zoomed in picture. This lake we surveyed for years is always in great shape, no invasive. This is in Ames Knoll State Park out in Amesbury, Mass. And beautiful, pristine water body. It's 100 acres. So everyone knows an acre is about a football field. So, you know, a good sized lake for out there. That we never found invasives in there. And then some years went by with short staffed and no one really looking in that region of the state. And next time we went there, look at this one, as you can see all the way back in the distance, it looks like a little bit of just white, you know, fuzz on the surface. If you look at the zoom in on the right, that's the flowering structure. The Fanwort makes a little white flower. So that's 100 acres solid wall-to-wall Fanwort, just in that short amount of time where nobody was watching the place. So again, just the importance of early detection. European Naiad and water chestnut here. European Naiad you're going to find mostly in the Berkshire region of the state. It really likes those alkaline waters out there. Water chestnut all over the state. This is a floating leaf plant, and the key with water chestnut is that it is an annual plant. That picture you see on the right is the floating rosette. That's the actual plant. At first glance from a distance, a lot of people miss these because they're glossy. You get a few growing together from the distance, you might just think it's a little patch of lily pads over there. But when you get up close, as you can see, that looks nothing like a lily pad. The nuts for this plant are very big, probably get to the size of a walnut, thereabouts. And there'll be a bunch of those hanging out just underneath these leaves. Once they mature, they break off and they hit the sediment. Those can stay dormant and ready to go for at least 12 years. I've seen some studies even saying 15. So, but it's an annual plant. This is the easiest plant to get rid of if you find it early. All you have to do is literally pull that plant off the surface of the water body before it drops the seeds, and you have completely saved the day. Here's an example of what happens with so each one of those seeds, those rosettes, will excuse me, one seed will produce that one rosette that we saw in the picture before, that image right there on the right. Now from that stem of that plant, you could have 10 or 20 more of these rosettes from that single stem, so single seed. Under each one of these rosettes, you could have 10 or 20 nuts formed. So basically, do that quick math out. One seed that is allowed to germinate and grow it could be something like 200 new ones by the end of the year. So here's what happens on a place that's left alone. I mean, this is water chestnut wall to wall. There's not a messier invasive out there in the state or the region. Again, it's very manageable if you find it early. These are before and after pictures. We've got this place down. I'd see here 5 years of hard work, a lot of machines, a lot of money spent. But what happens, because it's an annual, as long as you go out there every year, we remove all of those plants from the surface. Now we've got the sunlight to the bottom, the whole new batch of seeds germinates, grows to the top. The next year we go in there, we do it again, and again and again and again. And eventually you do deplete that seed bank, and you can have these type of results, this picture I have on the right. But I mean, we had essentially not unlimited, but a gigantic budget to reclaim this place. And it was successful. And we're at the point now where we do one volunteer hand pulling event every year. A few people out in canoes and kayaks. We find a few plants here and there that popped up, and we pull them by hand, and that's about it. Maybe 1 to 2 days, and that is it. So I would never use the term eradication when it comes to these invasives. Once they are established, it is management for life, unfortunately. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news. This one, I might consider using the word eradication. It is possible. Purple loosestrife, we talked about earlier. That's that emergent wetland plant. And common reed, Phragmites, you see that stuff everywhere in wetlands. It looks like, a lot of people think it's just cattails. It's much taller, gets up to maybe 15 feet high. It's got those wisps at the top. Again, if you've ever walked into a stand, I showed you that picture earlier, the large meadow covered in purple loosestrife. Beautiful, yes, but there was no native plants left. Same thing with the Phragmites on the right. You've seen these swamps. You've driven by them on highways, drainage ditches. You've seen these 15-foot tall reeds. Take a look in there. There's not one other thing growing in there. Most of it takes over 100%. That species richness and diversity I talked about is completely gone. We've got a monoculture, little to no value to wildlife. Certainly not a situation we like to see very often. Unfortunately, with both of these plants, they're so widespread now, there's very little management going on. It's a battle that is tough to win. So again, early detection, adopting one little site, in an area that you use or that you monitor, and catching these first few plants and getting rid of them just mechanically, just literally pulling by the roots, that sort of thing, and stop them before they have these huge takeovers. Asian clams, pretty widespread these days. There was up to, maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, we had, maybe 20 sites statewide, but they're just popping up left and right. And where I always find these, you will always find these starting at a public boat launch. I can't think of one situation where that's not the case. And these spread microscopically. The larvae of these clams holds in the live well water or bait bucket water. So that is why we always find the start of these populations right at a public boat launch. And nobody can see them. These don't cling to the boat like zebra mussels do, that we're going to talk about. These just grow on the bottom of the lake, just embedded in the sediment, right near the top of the sediment. Are these the most destructive organism I've ever seen? No, but they are non-native. Like we don't want the problem is, especially with these, it's really competition with things, especially like rare, threatened, or endangered species. If we've got some rare mussels, state-listed mussels, snails, etc., you got some competition there, and it's something we're concerned with more from an ecological perspective. You won't really see a big recreational impact from these clams like you would with zebra mussels. So just to keep in mind. And this is the only clam like this you'd see in a lake. Everything else we have freshwater mussels, those elongated oval. These are more of these small, round, almost look like the mahogany clams you can buy at a grocery store, the edible ones. I'll call these new infestation. Basically, these are like our high watch list. We've already have enough problems. We've got tons of invasives out there. We spend a ton of money and a ton of staff time dealing with. These are ones that, yes, they have been found in Massachusetts, but in very limited locations, and we have been on top of them. These are ones that we really try to stress to people to learn what they look like. We're really trying to keep these out of Mass. I take a minute just to bring up one other point. I hear a lot of times with trainings, people say, well, my lake already has milfoil. What do I care? Why should I be out there looking for, we're already infested? Because there could always be something worse. You've already got the one thing to deal with. Trust me, some of these are worse than the common ones I talked about. So yeah, you want to be diligent, and regardless if you have no invasives in your lake, you should be really on top of the game. Very structured monitoring program, and hopefully checking boats coming in and out. But these things we certainly want to keep out of here. High priority. So parrot feather, another aquarium plant, very pretty. We only, well, it says here, I at the time I put this slide together, 2 known infestations, and they were only really these backyard, like neighborhood ponds, where someone probably planted it as like a landscaping thing for, just as aesthetic value. And then suddenly, once they realize their entire pond is no longer a pond, it looks like this thing on the bottom. They realize, oh, that was probably an invasive. I'm sure there are more of these backyard ponds that have this plant, because this is definitely from the aquarium trade. We haven't found these in any recreational lakes, so we're always on the lookout for this one. Very easy to identify. South American waterweed, 3 times we found this. This one looks like one of our native plants called Elodia. Again, big aquarium trade plant. This is one of our lakes. This is a state park town in Taunton. This is Lake Rico. This is the spillway from Lake Rico, big DCR park down there. So where I'm taking it, well, there I am down there. That's a piece of what we call benthic barrier. If you're looking down to this spillway, this is the dam. This is where everybody fishes from and hangs out in the sun and just hangs out. So this infestation I found just by looking over the edge, and right there at the spillway, that whole area that you see on the picture on the right there was covered in the South American waterweed. And I have not found it other than some backyard or neighborhood ponds. I haven't found it in one of our big public lakes yet. This was the first one. And just because of where it was, I think it was clearly and probably an aquarium dump or something like that. It just with the human accessibility to that spot. But we just got lucky and found this one early. All I simply did, I mean, again, anything you do, you do need permits for in Massachusetts under the Wetlands Protection Act. So I did go to Taunton Conservation, got a negative determination of applicability, and all I did was go in there with a mask and whatnot, carefully hand pulled all the plants that were there, put them in the mesh diver bag, and then got some of this benthic matting, which is just like weed matting you'd use for your garden, but it's what they call negatively buoyant. It just makes installation easier so it actually can sink. So just in case I missed some plants or some of the roots snapped off, I covered the area in this benthic barrier just to block the sunlight. It's also was part of my permit. And I check the site every year now. I've never seen a plant again. So there was this EDRR, early detection rapid response, at its finest. And again, just kind of got lucky there on that one. So we could have had a big problem there. Hydrilla. So this is one I kind of wanted to spotlight today. I'm going to just talk a little bit extra about this one. Hydrilla is probably #1 on our hit list for plants that we want to keep out of Massachusetts. It spreads very quickly, grows over an inch a day. Here's a key stat, not to bore everybody with stats, but think about this for a minute. 50% of the biomass occurs in the top half meter of the water column. All that really means is that this plant goes up and makes these giant tree branching canopies and covers the surface, and it will cover acres and acres and acres in no time. Hydrilla is all over the place. It's down in Florida, it's covered. I don't even think they need permits to treat for it anymore. I think it's like landscape companies going around and spraying. I mean, it just has overrun so many places, but we're starting to get more and more up here in the Northeast. It doesn't care what the water quality is, low light requirements, can grow in polluted waters. But now, so this is one higher on our list, and we do have it now. 5 recreational lakes in the state, and now the Connecticut River. But we check this list out. The first one we found was Long Pond. Now, also, all of these sites we actively have been managed. And some of these we're not finding any plants anymore. We've done a lot of systemic herbicide treatments, hand pulling work, combinations of both. But you notice Long Pond and Barnstable down the Cape, 2002. Hobomok Pond, Pembroke is also Southeast Mass. Marshfield, Southeast Mass. Mystic Lake again on the Cape, Southeast. So you see this trend, it's like regional. It's getting spread around in a region. Then in 2010, suddenly we had South Meadow Pond up in Clinton, which is central Massachusetts. And last year, the Connecticut River in Agawam, one site. We're actively doing work there. We're doing environmental DNA work all over the state, actively looking for hydrilla. If no one's familiar with environmental DNA, eDNA, essentially it's a really great new tool out there. We're able to go out there. We do a lot of surveys by boat. We do a lot of scuba surveys. There's no better way to see the bottom of these lakes than getting down there and actually taking a look. A lot more than you can see from the surface or with a sampling rake or anything else. So, but now adding to those surveys, we now have technology. We've got a contractor working with us. Basically, you can go on any of these lakes. You just literally take a water sample, a few liter here and there, a few sample sites, run it through the lab, and it will tell you whether or not you have this species somewhere in the water body. Then you can go out there and ground truth it and try to actually find the plants. But the eDNA technology is excellent. We're using it for zebra mussels right now. We're using it for hydrilla, again, because of how high priority it is for us to keep this out of the state. So the Connecticut River site is quite a mystery to us. We're doing a lot of work there right now. South Bend, just want to show you how nasty hydrilla can get. So this is one you really want to learn how to identify. South Meadow Pond is another one of our, it's got the state Department of Fish and Game boat, car top boat access over there in Clinton. And so let's see, I don't know if you can see my mouse cursor here, but this is the causeway. That's where the public boat launch is. The next pictures, I'll show you what this actually looks like. The green is the distribution. So it's spread pretty quickly. This is the very first year that we discovered it. Actually, a Holy Cross student discovered it, knew some stuff about plant ID, and contacted us. And this had already spread. Like, here we go. This is right at the causeway near the public boat launch, 2010. That's trying to paddle through hydrilla. I mean, it's pretty nasty stuff. So, and that was, again, going from open water to, in 1 year, creeping across this whole lake. You can see this line in this photo. Excuse me. You see the line in this photo? That is the plants coming out from the public launch site, and just that biomass in the top third of the water column I talked about, just how fast it creeps across and covers the lake, makes quite a mess. So obviously we wish that we didn't get to this point. We had the very first year, big fluoridone treatment, which is very effective, and it is a systemic herbicide. You kill the root system. I mean, we're talking 60 grand it took us that first year. And then for the next few years, 40,000 a year maintenance. We're at a great spot now where we've been able to do some hand pulling. We've done a little bit of spot treatment with contact herbicides, but it was quite expensive to get started. If we had found that a little earlier, we would not have had to get into that situation. This one is Mystic Lake down in Barnstable, 2010. Here we are again working. So here's like another option. This goes back to that early detection rapid response. I showed you at Lake Rico how I hand pulled the South America waterweed and then put that benthic matting on there. This was sort of a large scale effort of this. This was trying to, minimize the use of herbicides, save some money. Once this plant was discovered, we had a huge volunteer effort. This went on for days and days. It was ton of work. And basically the buoys you're seeing there, we put these fragment nets down. We had volunteers standing outside with butterfly nets to catch any plants that got broken off. And then we just went in there and heavy raked, tried to get all these root systems out, carted it off in canoes, and also went in there and put, just like I did at Rico, we did the benthic matting. So here we are in the top left there, building these panels. So we're blocking the sunlight, laying these down over the areas we already hand pulled. So every effort was put in there to get on this as early as possible. And unfortunately, I have to report that we did not get it all. And what was left took off and it reinfested the place and ended up having to do big expensive treatments in the end anyway. But this was a bit of an undertaking, but it was, it was certainly worth the effort. Zebra mussels, I'll touch base on these quickly. You see in Worcester, and I have a colonization map, susceptibility to colonization. I'll show you in a minute. Zebra mussels, I just want to touch base because we do have them in Massachusetts. You don't have to worry about them so much in Central Mass. We don't have the right water chemistry. Zebra mussels need a very, very specific set of water chemistry characteristics, and there's two things: very high pH and high calcium concentrations. Not one or the other. It needs both together in order to reproduce, actually grow shells, and survive. Western Massachusetts, in particular, has those exact conditions, and that is where we have our one zebra mussel infestation in the state. The zebra mussel is sort of like a freshwater barnacle. You can see here they grow. It's a byssal species. They've got these byssal threads that cling to things. You see the boat motor encrusted, almost looks like freshwater barnacles. That's actually a crayfish. It's not a lobster. These things are teeny tiny. The larger ones might grow to the size of your fingernail, but they get a lot of impacts, not just the clogging and clinging, but they're filter feeders. And they can actually sense certain toxins in the water, and they won't filter under certain conditions. A byproduct of that can be these toxic algae blooms, the cyanobacteria, like that photo in the middle there. So there's a whole host of things. It's not just the clinging and the mess that they make and the razor sharp shells on your bare feet, but here's the kind of thing we run into. Fortunately, not on an everyday basis, but I mean, this was a boat out at Onoda Lake in Pittsfield, Mass. That had all kinds of living zebra mussels on. They're coming from New York, ready to just flop right into Lake Onoda and do some boating, and with all these live zebra mussels. And Onoda Lake is high risk. It has the perfect water chemistry to support these. So this boat was stopped, fortunately, but some do get through, and we did find them back in 2009 in Laurel Lake out in Lee Lennox line. And that's still to this day the only location that we have them in the state, but we are really surveying these lakes. We're doing the eDNA, we're doing scuba surveys, we're looking multiple times a year at the other high-risk lakes. And so far, so good. We've got boat ramp staff at all these high-risk lakes, checking people, educating people. So the effort, I think these would have probably turned up somewhere in the region if that effort wasn't there. Yeah, scuba surveys, looking for these mussels. This was back in 2009. This was like a big scare for the state. Because of this infestation at Laurel Lake, this is what started this nuisance species law that we have in Massachusetts now. You're at these boat ramps seeing the signs with the "It's the law." Before this, that was not the case. This is what started the whole thing about transporting. So just so you know, in Mass now, it is illegal to be driving from one lake to another with any sort of plant material hanging from your trailer, for example. There's some hefty fines involved. All of the environmental police in Mass have been trained. I trained them myself at their headquarters in Westboro on 2 different events. So they're all aware of the law. They are checking, they are ticketing. So at least we have that on our side these days. We're trying not to police these boat ramps. That was part of my training with them. It's about education and outreach first. A lot of people just don't know. So just jumping on someone and slapping them with a $5,000 fine or something, it's not a great way to get the message out. We try education and outreach first, but we do have that legal power there, which we never had in the past before the zebra mussels were found. Here's a few images. This was the very first year. So these mussels had already been there for a few years. You see this bottom picture, there's multiple age classes there that we found in our scuba surveys. So they had been in there for a few years at least already before we actually discovered them. And you know, back to what I was saying with the water chemistry, obviously Quabbin is a very important resource. It's drinking water for all of Boston, and this concern for zebra mussels clogging the water lines, you know, came up. Even though we explained the water chemistry at Quabbin would not support them, but we did go in and do surveys, and you know, one of the nice benefits of my job, I did get to scuba dive all over Quabbin Reservoir. No one really gets to do that, so that wasn't a bad day or two at the office either. Susceptibility of colonization. Here are these regions. The Berkshire region way out west, the dark red, that's the most suitable. That's at a high pH, high calcium. The Connecticut River Valley, we do have one lake, especially in Pequot Pond, the Hampton Pond State Park in Westfield, that could support them. And then a couple places up in the Merrimack, which you see there in the northeast, but pretty rare. And even the lake, the couple ponds there that we did water sampling, they were really borderline as far as whether these mussels could even survive there. So, boat wash station. This is at Laurel Lake, but this is something that could be used statewide. This is an old picture. We actually have ramped this up quite a bit, but all we do here is hot water. That's what we hand out information with a lot of different things, different chemicals, bleach solutions and vinegar and this and that and the other thing. But hot water, Mass DEP did a great study, and at 150 degrees Fahrenheit, we're getting like instant mortality of the larval stage of the zebra mussels. So hot water is the way to go if you're worried about microscopic organisms. If you have the ability to do it at home, that's terrific. Otherwise, you're looking at drying times, or you're looking at like bleach solutions that you need to leave on there for 15 minutes before you wash off, that sort of thing. So if you got hot water, you got instant results. So something to keep in mind. Future threats, things that we don't really have here, we're on the lookout for. Didymo rock snot, that's that picture on the right bottom. More of a, it's all over New Zealand. A few places like Colorado, I've seen it. This stuff's really going to be found in trout streams. It loves that crystal clear, you know, picture your perfect trout stream. That's where you'd see this rock snot, Didymo. Not so much in lakes. Spiny flea, fishhook flea, that one we're highly concerned with. New York State has some. We haven't found it yet in Massachusetts. Snakehead fish has been found a couple times in Mass, and I've also have had multiple reports from anglers who have told me that they have caught snakehead. However, nobody has ever produced the sample for me. So all you fishermen out there, if you ever think you caught one, please save it for me. Freeze it, let us know. We have a couple lookalikes in Mass, especially out by the Connecticut River, like the burbot. So I'm hoping that is what they caught and just didn't know the difference. So, but we are on the lookout. Snakehead was found in a place out in Millbury, close by you folks, and by an angler. The Mass Wildlife went in and did electroshocking that whole lake, and there's never been another one turned up. So I assume that was just one fish that was released intentionally for whatever reason, because there were no more found there, and no one's found any since. So if you ever catch something that looks like that, please save it, freeze it, let me know. More images of the snakehead. The fishhook flea, it makes a real big, I mean, there's a lot of ecological impacts, but if any of you have ever been out on any charter trips, or you guys do have your own boats, you fish on the Great Lakes, do any trolling, especially with downriggers, this is what your line's going to look like coming out of like Lake Ontario, for example. This stuff just builds up. It's almost like a wet cotton, nearly impossible to get off your lines. It's a real mess. So we have not found that in Massachusetts yet. So wrap it up here in a minute. What are the kind of things we're doing in Massachusetts? Jacqueline mentioned the Weed Watcher program that myself, my colleague Jim, we do together usually. Basically, it's a free training. So again, I said all my work is on DCR properties, but we are allowed to go outside of that for education outreach. because these invasives do impact our state parks on a statewide level. So we watch a program, we come out and bring basically a mobile lab, show you how to identify these plants, and do a little bit of just general lake info and question and answer type stuff. Get people knowledgeable about the issue and what to be looking for. Boat ramp monitoring, unfortunately, our funding can only go to DCR, these state boat ramps, and even at that, currently, I only have this summer, for example, what do I have this year? 8 staff maybe working full time. So we have to pick and choose. Usually we pick protection lakes that are clean. We're trying to keep stuff out of, like Walden Pond in Concord, for example, Wallen Lake down in Douglas, places like that. But we also have staff at Laurel Lake with the zebra mussels and a couple other high-risk zebra mussel lakes. So the more the better. You know, we've had some lakes do volunteer boat ramp monitoring. It's tough to get people to go on a nice Saturday and sit at the ramp for a few hours checking people coming and going, but that's the first line of defense for the lake. So and education outreach materials, just so everyone knows, and they're free to you. We have tons of stuff, boat ramp signs, educational handouts about boat decontamination and just invasives in general. We've got the floating key rings, all these things for education outreach. If you have any need for some, you just got to let me know. I will get the materials to you for distribution or use however you would like. And the things, it is the law, we mentioned it, and what can you do? Clean, drain, and dry, which is we're cleaning the plant fragments, we're draining our live wells, we're allowing the surfaces to dry. And as you could imagine, different weather requires different drying times. If you do not have time to dry your equipment, then you're going to do clean, drain, and decontaminate. So we're cleaning, the decontamination part is that hot water I talked about, or doing a light bleach solution, doing vinegar and letting it sit. There are ways to do it. And the key thing here, monitor. Learn about these plants, what to look for, you know, get involved, get organized. Even a lot of places do, you have one person or a team that, you know, they adopt one section of shoreline of their lake. That's theirs. They're in charge of it. Get out there as often as possible. Instead of the daunting task of surveying a whole lake, just hand out the chores, adopt a small section, one little cove, one section of shoreline, and you stay on top of that. Do some snorkeling, do some visual looking. You watch that area. So if everyone chips in like that, you should be able to stay ahead of the game. That's all I have for you for today. So I don't know if we're doing questions now or later on, but I will be here. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Tom. Does anyone have any questions? You could unmute yourself or you can add them into the chat.
Jacqueline, can I ask a question?
Absolutely. Go for it.
This is Beth Proco. I'm president of the Indian Lake Watershed Association, and I've had the opportunity to take the Weed Watcher program that you do on several occasions, which is awesome. And I think everything you shared tonight was fabulous as well. A couple of things. I will definitely be in touch to try and get some of the outreach materials as we get to meet in person again. I think those would be great to have. I'm also wondering, do you have any type of social media campaigns that you do, different things that we can be sharing to help to educate people, especially about cleaning their boats and their equipment as they move from lake to lake?
No, we don't. I think a lot of these things are coming around. There's no specific social media platform that we're using to spread the message. Some of the things we have done, I mean, things get added every year. So for example, now boat registration mailings, they include the information. Mass Wildlife's magazine on the fishing and hunting regulations every year. Now you'll see in there a whole one-pager from us, from our program with the Stop Hitchhikers campaign. So, I mean, there's more things we have added over the years, but no specific social media posts at all. I mean, it's a good suggestion. If I can, you know, figure out a way to get our IT staff to start putting it out there, then certainly something we could look into.
I have a question. This is Barbara. I'm with the Lake Quinsigamon Watershed Association. Hi, Tom.
Well,
We had a question. Do you have the early detection DNA testing for the water chestnut? Because we have had some, but we try to pull it out.
We have, so the tricky part with eDNA is that, and it's not that it's not doable. You have to develop what they call an assay. So there's no, the test doesn't just, you don't take a water sample, run it for eDNA, and you get this result back that there's 50 different species in the sample. The test can only look for one specific marker. You have to develop this assay first. Once one is designed for one particular species, so we did Hydrilla, for example, because there wasn't an assay out there. They're everywhere for zebra mussel and quagga mussel is very common practice doing eDNA. Those you can use, those are already established. We found there was nothing out there for aquatic plants. There's a lot for fish, salmon and trout, these kind of things. There wasn't any for plants, so we picked one to start with. So we got this Hydrilla one. So now that assay is set forever. If anyone wants to look specifically for Hydrilla, you can do a water sample, and this lab can tell you if there's Hydrilla in there. To do water chestnut, we would have to take a water chestnut sample, have the lab develop method in the assay for that species, and you would go out and sample just for that species. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. The reason why it's not so easy to just go, get a group together and go pull all the water chestnut is that it's on the very north end of Lake Quincy. We call it Mud Pond. Sometimes it's called Shirley Pond. But it's on the other side of Main Street, and there's a lot of weeds over there, a lot of lily pads. So it's kind of buried in with the other plants there. We've tried to pull whatever we see, so it doesn't look like there's much, but it could all of a sudden just be a huge problem, it seems like. And then I just had another question about Asian clam. Glad to hear you're not super worried about that. It's been detected by a lot of residents all over the lake. We do have a hard time finding live ones, which is weird, but they're there. We see they must be there because we've seen the clams. I know personally I'm seeing less of the native clams now in my yard, in my waterfront. And we've also had a lot of increased clarity in the lake over the last couple of years. And was just wondering if you have heard anything or had any association with presence of the Asian clam and increased water clarity. Like they're just, we had someone talk to us at DEP who talked about the fact that the Asian clam preferentially takes the good algae and leaves back the cyanobacteria. I think you were mentioning that as well.
Yes, with zebra mussels, correct.
As for zebra mussels, apparently Asian clams are similar. So just wanted your thoughts on that, the water clarity with Asian clam, and could they be associated with increased cyanobacteria potentially?
No, they absolutely could be. And I didn't want to downplay that we weren't concerned with Asian clams. It's not, that's not what I was really trying to say, but there's just not a lot of work being done on Asian clams. It's not, it hasn't become as high a priority as some of these other species. But yes, you're correct. Filter feeder is a competition. And like the zebra mussels, they filter feed the water. If you want to see crystal clear water, go to any of these lakes that have zebra mussels. But you have that trade-off with the clear water, and a lot of people like it. And these have been intentionally introduced to some dive quarries. I just got back from a master diver certification down on a quarry in Pennsylvania. Beautiful diving conditions, crystal clear, because it is covered in zebra mussels. But Asian clams, same thing. If you had enough of them, yes, they're filtering the water. You have this clear water. But the trade-off, more clarity, the deeper nuisance plants can grow now because you got sunlight getting to the bottom out in deeper waters. And you have exactly what you just talked about, the increase in some of these cyanobacteria blooms, which obviously does the opposite of water clarity. So as far as your specific situation goes with it, it would require probably a very specific and multi-year study, and not having data from the past, it would take quite a while to identify that, yes, because of the Asian clams, the water clarity is increasing, the algae blooms are increasing. It would take quite a few years to gather that data, and no one's really been doing it out there. So I think it's certainly a possibility, but without the data, we couldn't really say that with a very high level of certainty.
Does anyone else have any questions for Tom? Well, thank you so much, Tom. That was excellent. So before we move on to Peter Collins's presentation, I just wanted to follow up on that really quickly with a little bit about what we're doing here in the city to address invasive aquatic species. So here in the city of Worcester, at certain lakes and ponds, we go out and we monitor for all sorts of physiochemical parameters, including phosphorus and nitrogen, temperature, dissolved oxygen. But while we're out there, we're also keeping an eye out for our invasive aquatic plants and other species. So we are out on Coes Reservoir, Bell Pond, and Indian Lake about 2 times a month. And in addition to us just like paddling around, we also do have periodically a contracted environmental company come out and do official surveys like the one you see on the bottom of the screen. And these are really used to help us do the permitting and the management of the lakes and ponds. So we have them come out every 1 to 2 years to those 3 lakes and ponds. Unfortunately, we do have challenges with invasive aquatic species in these lakes. At Bell Pond, we have found the Asian clam. We don't have any invasive aquatic plants there. We do have some along the shoreline. We have a lot of knotweed, but that's not necessarily something that the Lakes and Ponds program is managing right now. At Coes Reservoir, we have several invasive aquatic plants. For those of you who are familiar, we do have that water chestnut, which we are actively managing through a variety of methods that I'll get into in a moment. We have a little bit of brittle naiad that we found for the first time last year in a very small clump. And so, of course, as Tom mentioned, the early detection and response, hopefully we'll be able to keep that under control. And we have a lot of Eurasian milfoil that has been reacting very well, or has been doing very well with our chemical treatments over the last few years. At Indian Lake, we were able to manage invasive aquatic plants for a long time using non-chemical methods, and this year we are actually trying something new. So as far as, we also manage the, we have a management company that comes in to do some treatments and mapping at our smaller lake ponds, such as University Park Pond or Crystal Pond in Maine South, Elm Park, Green Hill Park, and Burncoat Pond. So prevention, of course, is one of the things that is really important. These problems become very expensive and the city has a very small budget. So the Weed Watcher program is something we host occasionally to help empower individuals to learn how to identify these plants, report them to us so that we can hopefully respond very quickly. We try to put up a lot of educational signage. DCR has been great in getting us a lot of that. If anyone here wants to put up some signs anywhere around their water bodies, I have a bunch that you are welcome to take and put up wherever you are allowed to do that. And we do try to react as quickly as possible. We have some open POs through the city, which basically give us the ability to contract a lake management company to address it in the appropriate manner if we do find something. As far as the management that we use, those water chestnut, we use mechanical harvesting. So that's just basically a giant lawnmower picking these things off the surface. which works well on that particular type of infestation, but not necessarily on some of the other invasive plants that we have in other lakes and ponds. We do a lot of hand pulling of those water chestnut as well in those areas that are more shallow that the mechanical harvester can't get to. We do in Indian Lake, we have used diver assisted suction harvesting or hand pulling using a dive team to actually just gently pull some of the Eurasian milfoil off the bottom of the pond to prevent that fragmentation that Tom was talking about. We use drawdown as a technique, which basically we use that at, we used to use it at Coes Reservoir for a little bit, but at Indian Lake as well, we'll bring down the level of the water a few feet during the wintertime to expose the shoreline plants, which are most susceptible or which are where they occur in higher density because they have more access to light, exposing those areas to the bitter New England cold. These invasives are very sensitive to those temperatures, so that helps gives a little bit of relief to the lakes and ponds. And then finally, when we need to, we will use herbicides, and we actually have an herbicide treatment coming up at Coes Reservoir tomorrow. We are having the water chestnut treated as well as some Eurasian milfoil. So we're looking forward to that. We'll be closing the lake for one day. And then hopefully that will bring us some relief from those invasives. And then we have another herbicide treatment coming up next Thursday at Indian Lake. For the first time since I've been working with the Lakes and Ponds program, we're using an herbicide that was just recently approved for use in Massachusetts, but has had some really great reviews elsewhere, a systemic herbicide called Procelicor. Very expensive, but hopefully will give us several years of relief from the Eurasian milfoil as well as the naiad that is giving us problems there. So the Lakes and Ponds program does provide management for these 3 ponds in the city of Worcester. However, we also have another very large lake in Worcester that has very high recreational value that is managed by the Lake Quinsigamond Commission. And so the Lake Quinsigamond Commission has a really challenging task of trying to figure out how to coordinate the management of this lake between 3 municipalities. In addition to that, they have the unique challenge of having endangered species mixed into their invasive aquatic plants. And so that requires other levels of permitting and definitely a unique management plan. And so we're really happy to have Peter Collins here tonight, the chair of the Lake Quinsigamond Commission, to talk to us a little bit about what they're doing on Lake Quinsigamond and just learn a little bit more about their program there. So I will hand it over to you now, Peter.
Okay, thanks, Jacqueline and Tom. Thank you very much. That was incredible. I'm gonna try to put up my presentation here. So just a quick background. As you can see here from the list, we have a lot of suspects from Tom's rogues gallery of non-native aquatic nuisance species. We have fanwort, we have Eurasian milfoil, we have variable leaf milfoil, brittle naiad, sacred lotus that wasn't on your list. That's in there, which we I'm thinking probably came from a fish tank or someone's koi pool or something. Curly leaf pondweed and water chestnut. And we've actually found water chestnut not just in Shirley Pond, but in the lake proper, which we picked out. So far we haven't seen a whole bunch of that stuff, but it's it definitely is popping up. In response to all this, the Lake Commission has been doing weed management and for almost I think it's 15 or 16 years now on Lake Quinsigamond. Our initial set of permits had one chemical on it. It had diquat, which was great. We knocked back most of the Eurasian milfoil here in Flint Pond. And apologies with some jet skis going by. And we so that was that worked out very good, but it kind of opened it up, and Fanwort popped up, and dicot doesn't do anything to Fanwort. So we decided, and our permits were kind of coming up anyway, so we retooled the management program to include a whole bunch of tools, including mechanical harvesting, the mats, hand pulling, chemical treatments. So everything we could really think of. So we had a quiver of things to work from, and we needed to do it. We didn't have to keep going back for different permits. And the permitting process, as Jacqueline said, is challenging because we have to go to the conservation commissions of the city of Worcester, the town of Shrewsbury, town of Grafton, and in doing so, we were kind of sidelined over to the to natural heritage because they discovered a state listed rare species plant, endangered species plant, Potamogeton, called P. vacei, in portions of the lake. So we've had to kind of deal around that, and it has impaired our ability to treat more widely in Lake Quinsigamond. We'll get to that in a second. The lake is basically broken up into 3 zones. It's a 775-acre lake. It's about 6 or 7 miles long if you go from the tip of by Round Pond to Mud Pond, sorry, not Round Pond, but Mud Pond or Shirley Pond, all the way down to the Irish Dam in Grafton. So also, we, as of 2019, took over the management of Newton Pond in Shrewsbury because of the invasives in there, and that's directly connected downstream. The Lake Quinsigamond itself is downstream from Newton Pond, so we have some more acreage to deal with now. But in the lake proper, zones A, B, and C are defined. You can see them up here, you know, Zone A, we have some spot nuisance plants going on. Basically, is a narrow strip along the shoreline and some of the smaller coves. That's been approved. We're gonna treat that this year with dicot and/or clipper, and for the fanwort. And Zone B, it goes basically from Hamilton Street or so down to the southernmost part of Lake Quinsigamond proper, South Bay, Half Moon Bay, whatnot, and Round Pond, which is kind of the northern end of Flint Pond. And we're working, we'll get to this in a second in more detail, but we're working with Natural Heritage in a collaborative effect to test Prosilicore. Prosilicore is a very exciting solution for us because Eurasian milfoil and fanwort are very sensitive to the chemical. So although it's expensive, it doesn't take a lot to treat a broad area with it. So that's a good thing. And the experience on it has been that it doesn't really have much of an effect on Potamogetons. In fact, in some cases, it doesn't even knock back the Potamogeton, so it doesn't do much to those. We're hoping that we can do a pilot program. We had a diver in the water today, actually, a scientist to go through, and so we're going to do a survey next week. They're going to go back in, and we're going to grid it out and go back to Natural Heritage, who's being collaborative with us, along with the manufacturer and of Prosilicore, and we're going to do a pilot program here to see if we can, take care of the Eurasian milfoil and fanwort, and not hurt the the rare plants. And it's always been the Commission's goal to treat the plants that are a nuisance and that are non-native, and really, we don't want to harm anything that is native, or especially a rare plant. So we're very careful to make sure that we include that in there. But it does raise some big challenges because Half Moon Bay, for example, is being overrun by milfoil because milfoil just, keeps growing and growing and growing. And, the interesting part about treating around a rare species is that, the milfoil will grow in exclusion of anything else as well. So if we, if we don't do something with it, the milfoil is likely to also kill the endangered species. So, we're trying to get a balance there, and luckily the good folks at Natural Heritage are working with us to figure this out. Management Zone C is where we do most of our work now. It's got the heaviest and most dense population of Eurasian milfoil and fanwort, especially in the Grafton side of Flint Pond, to the east. And also in there that's where the sacred lotus is, and that stuff is extremely aggressive. So it'll start off, it looks like a little lily pad, which is what we all thought it was, except that the leaves on it are giant, like elephant ear leaves on the thing. It's a beautiful plant. Like when it grows, it's nice, unless it's in front of your dock, and then you don't think it's that nice. So we hit that before. This plant actually is not a fragment spread plant. It's seed based, so it's kind of like what Tom was talking about, where we have to go and get it every year, and sooner or later we'll get the seeds out of the bed and it'll be gone. But we've had good luck with it. So we actually used a product called Sonar on the Zone C 2 seasons ago, and it did a very effective job of knocking all the milfoil and the fanwort back. We didn't really have a problem with it. Didn't really show up too much last season, and this season we're going to treat it again with diquat and clipper. So that's what we plan to use there. And we're going to use the glyphosate application for the sacred lotus if it pops up. So we go to Newton Pond. Newton Pond also has a good healthy population of fanwort, Eurasian milfoil, variable leaf milfoil. Fortunately, there's no known priority habitat there with a rare in it, so that's good. And we've been approved on that to go through with diquat and clipper. So, and Newton Pond also adds another community to the mix of our permit journey, because we have to get a permit from the town of Boylston, because they have a property on part of the pond is in Boylston. So that was an additional experience. This is a closer up view of where the because people always ask this about PVACI, like where the heck is it? So you can see in the red dots, that's basically where we have ACI in Lake Quinsigamon. This is mostly in Zone B, and matter of fact, it's all in Zone B. There's some as far north as the Old Faith Bay, and we have some in the South Bay over there. If you look over to the right side, the left, there's a bunch of it there, and then Half Moon, you can see in Half Moon Bay we have a bunch of it. I did see some. I believe that's what it was. I'm not a expert at it, but I'm pretty sure that's what it is that we discovered. And I hopefully Don will discover some more. And but this area right here is where we're planning on doing the pilot program, because it's very protected in here. There's not a whole bunch of chance. The only channel out into the main part of the lake to affect anything else negatively would be right through here, and this is and the lake flows in this direction, so we should be fine. This section over here and on Flint Pond, that's the round pond section of Flint Pond. It's mostly sediment in there, but there's a whole bunch of vacei in there. So not the best control place for us, because there's not a bunch of milfoil in there. So we have nothing to really test with the Procyllicoin. I just don't want to dump it in for nothing. But we do have a bunch of milfoil in the Old Faith Bay. So if we can't find it here in Half Moon, which I'm pretty sure based on my experience yesterday, it's in there, then we'll go to that for the next control. And that's basically it in a nutshell. I wanted to get us done here as close to 7:45 as I could.
Excellent. Thank you, Peter. Does anyone have any questions for the lake management plan at Lake Quinsigamond?
I'm going to unshare my screen here somehow as soon as I find out how to get out of it.
It's a really exciting study. This is the first time you've done something like this, I understand, Peter.
Yes, it's the first time I think a lot of people or anybody's done something like this. Certainly at Lake Quinsigamond, and our ability to get our friends at Natural Heritage involved at this level and allow us to do something like that, because it's really been a hard no for the last, I'm going to say, 5-6 years since we first found it in 2015. So they've been basically, you can't do this, you can't do that, and it was also a technology breakthrough, because Prosilicor came out, and it happened not to affect the rare plant. So we're hoping that that's going to happen, and there's a pretty big cost to it, because we have to do surveys beforehand, map it out, identify exactly where it is, and then we have to treat it, and then we have to go back after we treat it. And there's a short window too, because Vasei is only up probably 6 weeks. So we got to get in there, we got to treat it, and then we got to go back and test to see if if it's still there, and hopefully it will be after we treat it. And then we have to test it again next season to see if it came back. So, but it is an exciting thing to do, and it's it's very interesting for us weed nerds. But we're hoping that it all comes out positive, and if it does, then we're going to be able to to better manage the other populations of milfoil and fanwort that we have in a part of the lake that also has Vasei in it. So it's going to be good for the lake overall, and then keep us on to the other part of it. And we are also work in collaboration with lakes and ponds in the watershed to do testing, which was an extremely important thing for Lake Quinsigamond, especially because we have over 400 outfalls coming into this pond, and plus we have we're spanned by 3 major highways and another road. So it's been a densely developed area since the 1850s. So it's a unique situation where we have this big lake in the center of a commercial district, and there's been homes on it for coming up on 200 years. So we're happy about that, and that we're making progress through it. I really appreciate the help we get from everybody. Thanks.
Excellent. It will be great to maybe at some point after the study is done to have a follow-up presentation on those results. I think that would be very cool.
Yeah, we're hoping to document it.
Oh, absolutely. I think you need to. It could definitely be have positive impact for other lakes in similar situations as well. So everyone, thank you so much for coming out tonight, joining us for this most recent Angler Event Series program. Thank you so much to Tom Flannery and to Peter Collins for sharing their presentation and their expertise with us tonight. This event has been recorded, and we will be making this recording available on the Angler Event Series webpage, as well as the Lakes and Ponds, City Lakes and Ponds webpage. You'll be able to find this at wooanglerseries.com. If you enjoyed the presentation, definitely check out some of the other events that we have coming up for the rest of the summer. We are currently in the middle of a unique event called Fishtail, Stories of Fishing in the Heart of the Commonwealth. This is an event that is being co-hosted by the Indian Lake Watershed Association. And the idea is that we really want to promote and share the stories that we all have of fishing at our lakes and ponds in Worcester, whether it be through a short narrative or a great photo that you got. We really just want to hear about your experiences out there. You can share them on Woo Angler Series by filling out a Google form. And there are prizes. So if your story meets one of those prize category criteria, you might win a prize. And by the end of the season, after the 2 months where we are collecting these stories, we are going to share them with the public at an in-person event at the end of the summer. So you could come and see all of the different fishing experiences that people have had in Worcester lakes and ponds. So in addition to that, I encourage you to also get in touch with your local watershed associations, all of which have been helping make our event series possible. They are doing a lot of really great work in and around the lakes in the area, and they couldn't do it without people like you. So with that, thank you all for coming tonight. I hope you enjoyed yourselves and to see you again soon. Have a great night.